Hello, I'm Atindra Chaturvedi. In the previous video, we took a look at VMware virtual machines and the various configuration parameters that we have at our disposal. In this video, we are going to look at creating and managing a multi-site content library. The topics that we're going to cover are implementing linked mode vCenter. So in order to have a multi-site environment, we need to set up a multi-site vCenter environment. I will go through the entire process of installing a linked mode vCenter configuration. We will then go into content catalogs and take a look at creating, deleting, and the issues of publishing and subscribing to them as well. And we will do it from a cross-site perspective. We will also take a brief look at authentication, roles, and privileges to a content catalog because it is a little bit different from the way it is done with vCenter. And as a consequence, when we look at some of the details of content catalog, we will be looking at the options we have for automatic syncing of content and on-demand syncing as well. I will also import few items into our catalogs, and we will see how they are propagated back and forth depending on what options that we set. So with that, let's proceed to our lab. We are now going to go through the process of installing a second vCenter server in linked mode. So what I've done here is gone to my DVD drive where I have the ISO loaded, the VMware VCSA ISO. I navigate to the root directory where I have VCSA-setup. I select that and I open that with Internet Explorer. And it's going to detect the client integration plugin. It takes a few seconds to do that, and here I am at the installation screen for vCenter Server Appliance 6.0. I already have a vCenter server already installed, but I have a second host that is already running ESXi version 6, on which there are no virtual machines, there is no vCenter server, there's nothing, just the base ESXi 6.0 installation. And in order to prepare for the multi-site content library discussion, I need to set up a second vCenter server on a different host. So I click on install, I accept the terms of the license agreement, I specify the address of the new host on which I want vCenter server to be installed. That is 192.168.0.210, and the password for that is this. I get the certificate warning, I accept it. It's doing some validations, and it comes back with this screen asking me to set up the virtual machine for the vCenter server appliance. So my appliance will be vCenter 6 and it's running on host 210. Now the OS password for root for the new virtual appliance is going to be a complex password. If I don't enter a complex password, it will complain. I hit next. I'm going to install vCenter server with an embedded platform services controller, and I will not create a new SSO domain. I will join an existing SSO domain because I already have vCenter 6 running as a platform services controller, and its address is 192.168.0.220, and its password is, and I click next, and it will ask me whether I want to join an existing site, and the answer is yes. I select the SSO name, which is site 1, and I click next. The new appliance, I'll select the tiny size, and I will, you know the options: tiny, small, medium, and large, 100,000, 4,000, and 10,000 VMs, and 10, 100, 400, 1,000 hosts. So we select tiny, and it's going to go through a validation process. Ask me the data store, and I select that data store that's available on that new host. I will enable thin disk, click next, and now it asks me if I need to use an Oracle database or an embedded database. I prefer the embedded one, it's just a small system. Now I need to enter the network settings for that new virtual appliance. Network type is static. I have to specify a network address for it, 192.168.0.221. Because my primary vCenter is 220, I'll give this 221. I think it's just easier to specify 192.168.0.221. The subnet mask is a 24-bit mask in this case. It needs it in this format. I wish VMware would standardize on this. My network gateway is 192.168.0.1. My DNS servers are 192.168.0.1 separated by commas, 8.8.8.8 separated by comma, 8.8.4.4. I think we all know what these are. I would like to use the NTP servers independently. They need to be separated by comma, so I'll use the pool servers which are in the US here, 0.us.pool.ntp.org, comma, 1.us.pool.ntp. Two of them should be sufficient. I always like to enable SSH in my lab environment anyway. And I click next. Okay, just a warning that an IP address was provided and it prefers a fully qualified domain name. That's fine. And I don't want to join the customer experience program as yet. Ready to complete. Let's just verify this. My target server is 210, hence my name has a suffix of 210. I'm installing it, deploying a new one, a tiny one, data network mapping, my two synchronizers disabled. SSO username is again administrator, and single sign-on was my original, and my domain is site1, which was my first site. Host name default 192. I think it looks good. I will now click enter, and it's going to go through its process, and I will pause the recording at this point. And so we have the installation completed. Your vCenter server is successfully installed. I can now log in into the new URL that I have here at address 192.168.0.221 to access my new system. This took about 30 minutes if you are interested in keeping tabs on this. And so that completes our section on deploying a second vCenter server in linked mode using the initial site platform services controller. So here we are at our vCenter homepage in our Vsphare web client. We have just finished installing a second vCenter, and the platform services controller was the one that was initially installed. That was the same one that we used for this second vCenter as well. So let's take a look at our vCenter servers. Now we have two vCenter servers. We have the original one, which was 192.168.0.220, and we have this new one that we installed, 192.168.0.221. So when I click on this and I look at related objects, I see a data center which is called Packed Publishing. When I click on 221, the other one, I have another data center that I created after it was installed, which is called Packed Publishing Site 2. So let's go back to our inventory lists and look at content libraries. We'll just read a little bit of the getting started. So a content library is a repository for virtual machine templates, vApps, and other files such as ISO images, scripts, and so on. And we can create three types of libraries. One is the local content library. You can have a published content library as well as a subscribed content library. So what we are going to do is click on objects and click on this icon, which will allow us to create a new content library. So we are going to call it lib220, since it's going to be controlled by the vCenter server that we are on at this point in time, 192.168.0.220, and I click next. We will make this a local content library, and whatever content is in there we will publish externally. I will not enable authentication. It's a simple password authentication. Both the passwords have to be implemented on both sides, that is the published library or the publishing library and the subscribing library. So I will now select a data store. You have the option of an NFS URL or a CIFS, remote file system basically. But we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to select my data store that's available. When I click next, it says ready to complete. So this library will be local to 192.168.0.220, which is why I've named it lib220. When I click finish, it'll start the process. Took about 20 seconds or so, and lib220 was created. It's a local library. It's published because we had specified that. It's not password protected because we had specified that as well. Now let's just take a look at some of the options we have here. So we can import items into it, which we will do in just a minute. We can edit its settings. We can rename it, of course. We can take notes that are available and visible in basically the summary pages for the libraries, or you can assign tags to it as well. We're not going to go through this process, but just to mention that the process of assigning tags, if it's done in a very consistent and deliberate manner, is really useful in doing programming. So if you're doing a lot of work with the API, or you have the reason to do searches and have groupings done in custom ways, then it's really very useful to assign tags, which are simple text tags really, that you can assign to objects under vCenter, and they're tremendously useful in grouping and being able to traverse collections if you are actually programming with the API. Of course, you can delete it as well. So let's look at edit settings briefly. So I've said that this library will be published externally, and that I have the option of changing the authentication, which I'm not going to do. And if someone needs to subscribe to the contents of this content library, then that's the subscription URL that has to be used. You can see that it is a JSON file that's actually created. I'm going to cancel out of this, and let's import a file. Keep it simple. We will import a local file. I'm going to browse, and as it turns out, it's looking for OVS packages. I'll say all files, and you know what, here's a PDF that'll serve our purposes, and there's a PDF that would be imported into this library. So when I go into lib220 and look at related objects, there are no templates there at this point in time, but when I click on other types, you see that that PDF file is actually available. We have the option of importing templates as well, and it takes a little bit longer because I'm going to import an OVF, I believe it's for the vCloud connector node, is the one that I have very readily available. So we'll take a look at that. So when browsing, it turns out I found a Windows 7 OVF, it's a 64-bit with tools. So I will select that, and when I say OK, this would be imported in as well. So the process has started. When I look at lib220's templates, I have a template coming in here, still in the process of being imported. So the stored content locally is no. It takes a little bit of a while, but later on it will change to an yes. What we are going to do now is to go back to content libraries while all that is going on, and you can see it's showing one template, but that's not entirely complete. And what we're going to do is to add a new library, and this library will be on a different vCenter. So this will be on our 221 vCenter, and that's why we're going to call it lib221. I have the option of selecting my other linked mode vCenter. When I click next, I will make this subscribed content library, but when I do that, I need to have the subscription URL available. So the idea is that lib220, the one that we have already created, will publish, and lib221, which is the one we are creating now, will actually subscribe. So we have to cancel out of this and obtain that subscription URL, which can be obtained by edit settings and copying the link. Click on copy, and then you can cancel out of this. So we go back into adding a new library. So that's lib221. It's going to be on server vCenter 221. I click next, subscribe content. I go in there and I do a Control V. the right click doesn't work in this, so I have to do a Control V to the keyboard shortcut to bring it in, to paste it in. But there it is. And as you can see, for those of you that like to do programming like me, it's a JSON file, JSON being a JavaScript object notation entity object. So it's in JSON format, and if you actually go to this URL, you can see the very simple text-based JSON format that's available. We're not going to enable authentication. I will specify the option of downloading the library content only when needed. So only the metadata is stored, and if I download all the library content immediately, then the entire library would be essentially duplicated. So remember, we are subscribing to content that is available in this original content library, which is 192.168.0.220, the one that we created first. So we're going to download the library content only when needed. So I will click Next, specify the data store. And this data store is obviously on the other server. And there we go. So the vCenter server will be the 221 server, and we're going to subscribe to the library, content library, that's on 192.168.0.220. So this is basically a multi-site configuration. When I click on finish, it'll go through the process. Once that completes, this is what is actually available. So if I click on content library, so we have the lib220, the original one that we created. That's our local content library. It is published. It is not password protected, and it currently has one template in it. The new library has also been created. This is the library on our remote server. And the remote vCenter, it's called lib221. It's subscribed. It subscribes to the content that's available in lib220. It is not password protected, and automatic synchronization is on at this point in time, it looks like. And there's nothing in there currently. So let's just take a look at lib220, because we had left it working, and it looks like this is still performing its actions on the content. And the other type, of course, that was a very small file, and its content was stored locally there. So the content is stored local. Just verify one more time. It's still not there. Let's look at lib221. Let's look at other types, and you can see that we had said that we should synchronize automatically, and that small PDF was basically synchronized. But the interesting thing is the content is not stored locally, because that's what we had actually specified. So only the metadata is there at this point in time. Now the actions that one can actually have against this is to export this item. I can clone this item, or I can synchronize this item, and I can obviously assign tags to it, and we talked about the tagging process before. Since this is a PDF, there's nothing much I can do with it. Let's find a template. Here's a template. Let's see if we can do any actions against it. At this time, I can only clone from it. It is still going through the process. It's probably a very large OVF, unfortunately. And really, that is all there is to multi-site content libraries. We created a library 220 on our local vCenter server, managed by our local vCenter server. We then created a library that subscribed to our local server, and we created that on the 221 vCenter server. And as you can see, we were able to basically synchronize these actions as well. Now, let's switch gears a little bit to authentication. We're at the home page here on our web client, and we go to administration, and in here we go to global permissions. The reason we do it this way is this: the content library is not part of the scheme of assigning privileges and permissions and roles to vCenter objects. The global permissions start off at a root level, and that's where permissions are assigned for content libraries. So we look at global permissions. Well, we'll first look at the roles. Okay, and you see that there is a content library administrator sample role. Now you know that we can basically clone this, and we can create new roles from it. That's part of standard practice in Vsphare. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Let's now look at the privileges for the content library administrator. So I click there, look at the privileges, and I expand this. As you can see, the sample content library administrator can add library items, can create local libraries, subscribe libraries, delete libraries, and so on. cannot import storage. I guess that would be for a storage administrator or for an administrator. But again, at this point in time, the methods are exactly the same of creating roles. You can create a custom content library administrator roles here, and then these roles can basically have different privileges that come with it, and you can assign them to users or to groups. So what we're going to do at this point in time is to switch back to our content library. When we left, we were in the process of importing some templates, and let's click on lib 220, and yes, that template has been imported into lib 220. It was an OVF, a rather large one I would suspect. Now it knows it's of type VM template. Before that it was unknown, and the content stored locally was no before. Now it is yes. And of course the PDF file should be here as well. Now let's look at library 221 and see what's in there. Of course that PDF is there. Look at the templates, and you can see that now it knows it's a VM template. It has stored only the metadata, but the content has not been stored locally. Now it's instructive to take a look at the actions here. So remember, we are now in the subscribing library, the library that receives items from the publishing library. So we can export this item, we can clone this item, we can synchronize this item with the publishing library. But we can also create a new VM directly from this template. And of course, in vSphere 6 with content libraries, you also have the ability to create a template and clone basically directly to content libraries as well from virtual machine. So it's very straightforward to do that. I can click on that, and we'll go through the same process basically that one would normally go through. Just remember that it's lib 221, so it's on my so-called remote host, and so your data center and folders will be out there since that's the library that you are using. So with lib 220 there will be some subtle differences here as well. Now we have this new VM from this template. We can export the item, we can clone the item, but we don't have the option of synchronizing the item because this is the publishing library. That content is already here. We implemented the linked mode vCenter. We created, deleted, published, and subscribed to content catalog. We took a look at authentication, look at the content administrator role, which comes as a sample, and the various privileges that are available there. And of course, you can create your own custom roles and then follow the standard practice. We also looked at managing authentication roles and privileges to a content catalog, and we took a look at how it is different from vCenter permissions, roles, and privileges. We looked at the automatic sync and on-demand sync options. They were pretty straightforward, and we played around a little bit with the cross-site content library by importing and creating VMs from templates, which is the last thing that we were doing before we left the lab. Let's take a look at what's in store for us going forward. In the next video, we will be looking at something really interesting again, configuring and maintaining a vCloud Air connection. vCloud Air is the VMware cloud product, and we will be looking at defining, managing hybrid clouds with the various tool sets that are available with vSphere 6 and with VMware. So I look forward to seeing you in that video.